Grief is such an overpowering emotion, especially after losing someone so close to you. It can take months, years, even decades to get back to normal, if that's even possible after experiencing a significant loss. This podcast was created to help you move through and release the emotions, allowing you to heal the hurt and begin living again. Listen in as I chat with medical professionals, grief workers, and people who have first-hand experience in losing a loved one, what their experience has been, and what they did to help heal themselves and those around them. Life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, but I believe there is always a silver lining if you're willing to look. Welcome to the Release Podcast. Welcome to another episode of Release Grief Podcast. I am here today with the lovely Kat Stanley, and today we're going to be talking about grief adjacent, if you will, because she didn't. We're not talking about loved ones and family members in this one, but she has this captivating story that she shared with me previously, that she would like to share because of the emotions that are wrapped up around it. So welcome, Kat. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And
Thank you for having me. I have to say, big fan of yours in general. So I appreciate you asking me or wanting me to be here. It is a different type of I don't want to say topics, but the grief that you deal with, but
yeah.
it still is, and it's very weird for me. So
Yeah, well, we've not had anyone talking about this one on there. So I've had a couple new podcast guests talking about new topics that have not been on the podcast recently. So I'm really excited to dive into this one to dissect all the things.
sure. So full and fair disclosure, it was just over a year ago. And when I talk or tell stories, I completely close my eyes and I can be there again. So I will be sitting there like that and still can, yeah, just be there. And yeah, so it's just want me to get started.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me what happened.
Okay, so it was August 2023, and I was in my hometown, which is about 6 hours from where I live now. And it's in farm country. So I grew up in a very rural area and was home visiting family. And this is when I had a very unexpected turn of events, I suppose, in my life that made me really kind of just sit back and how fleeting things are and just how lives intertwine and lives happen. So my experience with grief, I've had off and on multiple people. Unlike you, I have not lost a child or a grandkid or anything like that. I have lost loved ones very close and that kind of thing. Um, Today, yeah, is something very different that I hadn't experienced before. And I will say before I start this has happened twice in my life that I can very definitively remember in terms of response mode, fight, flight, fawn, and flee. And I am definitely fight between the two or
Mhm.
between, and so the two events, you just dig in.
Yeah.
So that being said, I wanted to do this today to kind of honor the soul that I got to be in touch with for about an hour and a half period. Um, so I was home in the fall in my hometown. It was harvest season, farm family, that kind of thing. And I was there with my child I like him to see all the machinery, all the things that happen. It just so happened during that long weekend that we were home. It was a giant full moon, harvest moon, and I love those, and especially the one that seems to take up the night sky. And
Mhm.
so after my son was in bed and it got dark out because it stays light very late up there, I contacted a friend who also works for my dad. and know that he like likes the same thing. And so we have become like sort of friends over the years. And it was like, hey, it's a giant moon. You want to go see the moon with me? And just kind of like, I live in a city, so taking in everything rural and farm, like the crickets at night, like all this, everything just takes me to a place that is very pure. And I like that. So he came and met me, and I got in his vehicle, and we drove like about 1.25 miles from my mom and dad's down this highway and turned into this driveway that was a no longer really a driveway of any, no one had lived there, excuse me, for probably 50 years or so. So it was like an old dilapidated house and that kind of like shed and stuff. And got out of the vehicle and stood outside and just like took everything in. Um, Caught up. I hadn't seen him in a while. And it just like, holy crap, like this moon. I don't get to see that in the city, whether it's light pollution or, whatever you think. Like it was beautiful. And
Magic.
the mosquitoes were also really bad. It was wet,
Yeah.
right? And so there's only so much of that you can take. And so just we were only there for like 20 minutes or so. I mean, it didn't need to be long. I just wanted to see it. And I did see it. Connected, like all that stuff.
Mhm.
So went in and got each on our side of the vehicle, and we were sitting there, and his window was down. And it was like, oh crap, I need to roll this up. Like I remember that. And he was just about to turn on the vehicle to roll it up. And so I was looking at him because he was the one doing the talking. Sorry, my voice is breaking, and I'm not nervous or anything, and I'm not going to cry. I'm just, I don't know. My apologies. But
Right.
so I'm looking, I see past him tail lights actually, and uh, about a second, like when I saw them, so he was looking my way, and there was tail lights that went behind us, or a car that went behind us too. And because it's very rural and it was later at night, he was like, geez, this is a really happening road at this time. I mean, there's like a car every few hours. So to see
Right.
two at this time, and that's important to the story. And so at that time, he said that, and I see these taillights, and then I see these taillights break. And then I hear like, like,
Yeah.
and it's bear season and it's all the things, and there's bear everywhere. And so I'm thinking, I bet they almost hit a bear because there was a cornfield on the other side of the road, which if that is not indicative of how small of a place I'm in, like it's just, I should say vast, but a very small community.
Hmm.
And so that's just what I think. And then the other taillights go by, and they didn't seem to stop. They went around, but then those taillights were still sitting there. And it wasn't anything at that point that was odd. Now, keep in mind, this is like a 15-second interval of time. But then the taillights didn't move on the one car that I saw stop. And I was like, hey, should we go check out? I feel like something happened down there. That car isn't moving yet. If you brake for a bear running across, like it's gone. And if they had hit this bear, the person in front of them would have stopped, or, whatever it was. My friend is like, I think they're okay. I think we should go. Like we were gonna go anyway, so let's just get going. So he backs up, and they were a quarter of a mile away. Because they said I was 1.25 miles from mom and dad's. They were a quarter of a mile away because where we ended up being was exactly 1 mile from my parents.
Mm.
And so we pull up, or we're getting up there, and there's a vehicle that is like, here, I'll do it this way. So like this way on the ditch,
So
or
it's at an angle in the ditch.
yeah, it's not straightforward and down like this. It's more on the side.
Okay.
And I could see another vehicle's tail lights straight ahead that was also in the ditch. And I had only seen kind of two at the time, or he was more pulled, that vehicle was more pulled off to the side.
Hmm.
And when we're coming up, there's a gentleman who's like mid-30s, and I see him at the window on the driver's side of the first vehicle I explained that was like this.
Yeah.
And I jump out of the car, and like I will never forget the smell of like just hot twisted metal and burned rubber. It's a stench, and it's not one I'll ever forget. Uh, and so I come up, and my friend is behind me, and he's significantly younger. And the reason I feel like that's important is, I don't know, maybe as we get older, like a patience or a sense of calm or something. I have a child, so when there's some sort of thing like, okay, assess the situation, and this was not him, which is fine. We all, anyway, I come up and I'm like, what happened? Is everything okay? And the gentleman that was there said, this guy is stuck in the car and I can't get the door open.
Mm.
And there's another vehicle involved that he hit, and she seems to be okay. But I left my family because they had swerved around, which that was the second vehicle that my friend saw. And when I said those taillights went by, there was debris and there was stuff, like he was a split second from being involved, but he managed to avoid the debris and that kind of thing.
Right.
And then he and his wife and two small kids kind of like into the ditch very softly.
Yeah.
And so his wife was okay, and she was trying to help the other lady. But she had also kind of like, she hurt her ankle and did that. And he had these two young boys. He really wanted to get back to his family. And I was like, you go back to them. I will take care of this. We have this. Like, just, and that was, I don't know if it was a relief. I feel like everything very much slowed down, even though it sped by,
Yeah.
in terms of actual, like how man-made time works. Um, so I'm standing at the door, and this gentleman is older. And by older, I mean, at the time I was guessing like mid-70s, late 70s to mid-80s. Like I didn't know. And I asked him, I was like, hi, sir. My name is, and I gave him my full name. And I said, what is your name? And he gave me his full name. And just for the sake of his family or respect who don't know anything, I'll call him by his first name. His name was Harlan. And so Harlan tells me his full name. And I'm like, where are you from, Harlan? Where are you coming from? And he said he was at this very small kind of podunk bar and grill that is in the middle of nowhere where I live. He came for a burger, and he originally lived in this community that was 40 minutes away.
Oh,
Now
wow.
keep in mind, this is like 10:30 at night. So I wasn't really, I mean, it didn't make sense to me, and just in terms of like age, where he was, what was going on. So I wasn't, but he seemed kind of lucid enough. And he stuck his hand out the window, and I grabbed his hand, and he said, please get me out of here. Don't let me die in here. And I
Mm.
said, I'm not going to leave you. I don't know that I can get you out, but I'm going to try. But I promise I won't leave you.
Yeah.
So I said, I have to let go of your hand. I need to check. He had a four-door, like Toyota truck. I think, no, it was a Honda. It was a Honda truck. I have to check the door, the whatever. The window was down about this far. And so the driver door was very much like smashed shut, which the other gentleman had told me.
Yeah.
And I opened the second door, and the back seat had been folded up, and there were 4 tanks, like long cylinder tanks,
Mm.
laying in the back. And growing up on a farm and
Yeah.
understanding compression, chemical, like that, like I don't know, is it propane? Like, so I shut the door and I go to Harlan, and I'm standing a little ways away, and I'm like, Harlan, like I'm still here, like with me. And he was in and out of not consciousness, but I want to say lucidness.
Hmm.
And is that, I don't know if that's a word, lucidity. Anyway, uh, I was like, what are these tanks in the back? What is in them? And he's like, oh, there's, and just, I'm like, you have 4 tanks. Can you just tell me what is in them? Are they full? And he could not get out what was in them. I didn't know if they were, I didn't know anything. And so I was like, I'm going to let go of your hand again, but I'm not going anywhere. And so I took a step back. Now keep in mind, my friend is still here, and he's fight or flight is what I said, right? He's definitely freeze. That was the other one. He's just frozen. And I took a step back by him, but he was still behind me. And I was like, what do I do here? I don't know what's in these. I understand the danger. I don't know what happened to Harlan's vehicle. Is it going to start on fire? Like all the elements, anything that could go wrong, right? Is it going to blow up? Are we going to catch on fire? Is anything.
Is today
And
going to be my last day?
yeah, like shrapnel, like
Yeah.
anything. And I don't have a lot of fear over my own life. I do have a son who's very young. And
Hmm.
that's where my head and my heart went, is if something happens to me, is this a selfish choice? Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, this was like a split second thing. And then the next thing that came to me is I was like, this is not even something to think about.
Hmm.
Um, there's another like human life in the balance, and you're here. I could never live with myself if I stood by and waited.
Right.
I want to also say that growing up where I did and during this time, the closest ER and ambulance is about 50 minutes away. And there's a first responders in my hometown, but these are all people that live in the country and do,
Yeah.
so it's coming in and they're trained in first response. But so it's, everything takes time, right? You have
Yeah.
your good and your bad living in a rural area.
So you're not able to just wait on the paramedics and the
Yeah.
ambulance and the fire truck to get here to get him out. You
And
have to
then,
make snap decisions right now to either let him sit there and potentially, have this thing like explode or blow up or whatever it's going to do, or like run the risk of your own life and pulling him out and getting him to safety and stuff like that. Correct?
yeah, or just him dying in the car because of his,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know at this time if 911 had even been called. And
Yeah.
so I tell my friend he needs to get his phone and he needs to call 911, and he needs to call my dad. My dad lives a mile up the road. And my dad is a whole other topic for me, but I'm gonna put it in a very succinct way here. He is a hero, and I'm very lucky that he's mine, right?
Hmm.
I'm in my 40s, and the first phone call I ever make is my dad.
Yeah.
That's just who he is for me. Anyway, my friend panics because remember I said he was younger and he works for my dad. So then he thinks like, I don't want to get in trouble for being with me, that kind of stuff. And he can figure that stuff out. I don't even know. But call 911, call my
Right.
dad. And so I made this decision, like I'm going for it. And so he left the vehicle to get the phone. I opened up the door. I just made peace with this might be the end, but I'm needed. So here
Right.
we So I jump in the back and I come around and I'm like trying to assess the situation. Now, remember, we're like this.
Horizontally in the ditch.
Yeah, so I'm like this. I'm gonna say like here's 90, here's 45. We're right here.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is 90. Whatever that is, I'm here.
Right, that's
That's my
45.
15. Thank
Yeah.
you. Uh, and so everything is, leaning, and there's this and just all the elements, and there's this gentleman who is rubbing his chest, and he's still like, I'm talking to him, and I'm like, okay, Harlan, I'm in your back seat. This is where I want to keep him talking because I don't know if he's slipping in or out. I'm not trained. The last time I took first aid and CPR, I was a lifeguard in college. Like, it's been a little bit. And
Also
I
don't
can't,
want shock to set in either. I mean,
that's
which shock is already setting in on him, but like if you wait, like shock could be setting in on you as well, just from the traumatic events that you're actually going through at this moment in time.
and that I was so calm. And so, like, you just, if you find this thing in you, that we will deal with that later. Right now, this is what's needed. Now,
Right.
for frame of reference, from the first time I saw these brake lights to this point in time, 4 to 6 minutes. Like, it
Yeah.
happens
It happens fast.
so fast. Um, so I come around him, I'm like, Harlan, I'm gonna reach over you and I'm gonna see if I can do the door this way. So I did all that, and I'm explaining and talking, and I'm using this tone, this soothing tone that I only really remember cooing like that when my son was little. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very like sing-songy almost. Um,
Yeah.
couldn't get the door. So I got out and I went around uh to the passenger side, and that was fine. So I opened the door and I'm like, okay, is this thing gonna go like this? Is it gonna go
Because
like
the
this?
door that you're opening on the passenger side is now down in the ditch.
So
It's
I'm up
facing
to,
the ditch, right?
if
Yeah.
I get in and, put my weight in, which, it's not significant, but it's enough, right? Like we've all seen the
Doesn't
cartoons where the
matter. Yeah.
feather falls and
Yeah.
whatever. And I didn't, yeah, it was, but I went for it.
Fine.
I'd already
Yeah.
committed. So I crawl in, and there's blood and feces, and I can see
Mm-hmm.
it and I can smell it. And there are reasons that I would never and have not gone into nursing,
Mm-hmm.
aside from the compassion that I seem to lack for a lot of things, as well as bodily stuff. Like, I can't do blood, but that didn't even register. Like, it could have just as well been water. Like, it's irrelevant. I'll deal with it later. I'm still by myself. I don't know where the friend is on the phone. The gentleman is with his family, that kind of thing. I reach over, I'm like, Harlan, I'm going to unbuckle your seatbelt. He was in his seatbelt and he was hung up and he was like, still. And I want to give him his voice in this. During this whole thing, we are talking. He is semi answering questions. But what we keep coming back to is, please get me out of here. Don't let me die in here. Get me out of here. Don't let me die in here.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not, what if there's neck trauma? I thought of that for like a split second. Should I move him? I'm not trained in this. He didn't want to die in there.
Right.
So I'm not going to let him die in there. A man who's like, so I unbuckle his seatbelt and I'm like, here's what I'm going to do, Harlan. I'm going to lay myself on you. I'm going to hug you. And then I'm going to roll you onto me into the passenger seat. And then I'm going to do one of these into the ditch or into the grass, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Knowing that he might not be able to handle that, but can you hug me? And I do this even with my own kid. Like, so when I pick him up, I'm like, you have to stay with me for me to be able to sustain
Right.
us.
How big is Harlan? I just want to, just for a
Sure.
size comparison, like,
So I am 5'8" and 145. And in that, Harlan, I'm going to say, was somewhere between probably 5'8" and 5'10". 180 to 190.
Wow. Okay. And this is
Um,
kind of like a dead weight too. Like, is he able to hold on to you?
he
Is
can
he
put, I had to take his arm and put it around me.
okay?
And
So
then
he was
the
weak.
other one, yeah, he can't do anything
Okay,
other
gotcha.
than stay with me, talk to me, that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I was just going to this place to have a burger, or I wanted a steak, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so I explained to him, this is what I'm doing. And I say, does your head hurt? Does your neck hurt? I can't feel them. I'm like, okay. Because at least I didn't, if he was like everything, I mean, my brother broke his neck twice actually, but when I was in high school. So I have very vivid things about this, but Harlan doesn't tell me. He just, I can't really, no, I don't think so. So I go into my bear hug, get his arm. He's unbuckled and he's got a stick shift. So that is also in my way. And there's a console. It's not just a straight seat in the front. And I roll them. And I at least use my legs for that. And we're in the passenger seat. And it was like almost like one fluid motion. I didn't sit there and go for it. I like rolled them. We sat for a second. I caught my breath and my strength again, and out we went. And
Hmm.
I didn't fall. I put my one leg down, and was able to hold us both with one leg. And it's not because I'm strong and I hit the gym.
It's a
There's
response.
it's a human life in the balance. You do these,
Yeah.
your body does these weird things, right?
Bionic things. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I get him down and I didn't drop him, which is another thing. Like I'm not like I lift 8-pound weights, right? Like I'm not that so, but I get him down and there's just stuff all over me. And his pants had caught on the stick shift, and so his pants had come down to his knees, and he was in a t-shirt. And granted, now like we're at 10 o'clock, maybe a little after. He said there was mosquitoes, the ditch had it was, but I got him out and I caught my breath. And are you still with me? Are you there? Are you good? Like you're out, you're this. And he was, yes. And he's like, I'm here. And just then, um, my friend and the other gentleman who was part of the accident showed up at the same time. And they had both called 911. So that was good.
Yeah.
Was expecting the first responders, like anytime the ambulance was going to be like an hour.
Yeah.
Irrelevant, whatever to me, we still have to, like, we have to get him out of the ditch.
Yeah.
Again, it's like cold. There's dew all over the grass. There's reeds where his legs are laying, and there's mosquitoes everywhere. And you can't. So I'm like, I need you two to get him up onto the highway. Um, and they were both, the one, his head and his heart, I'm sure, were still with his family. This one still is very like, what do I do? I'm like, I need you to pick up his legs and I need you to pick up his body and I will sustain, whatever is it, just get him up. Now the ditch isn't like some like big long thing. It's probably like
Mhm.
10 feet in total, like from here to here, and we would have been
Yeah.
ready. So they just had to get him up on the highway. Now remember, it's pretty steep, but they just had to get him up there. And so my friend handed me his phone and he's like, call your dad. Like, you haven't called him? Like, what have you been doing this whole time? Now, I say this whole time, like, they both showed up and they're like, how did he
For
get
like
out
10
here?
minutes.
Yeah, how did he get out here? I'm like, I did that. You picked him up and carried him? I did. Now get him out of the ditch.
Yeah.
It was probably, I'm gonna say 90 seconds, 2 minutes since the friend left to get, like, just everything happened so
Hmm.
fast, physically, but mentally.
Right.
So I take the phone and it's already got my dad programmed in there. And so I called and it was late. And when I had said earlier, like my brother had an accident and my parents are used to late night phone calls for various reasons.
Hmm.
and they have their own set of stuff. They deal with that. But I called, and my dad answered, and the only reason the ringer is on is because it's harvest season and he's got people working around the clock.
Yeah.
So he answers, and I said, Dad, there's been an accident and I am not involved. I'm not hurt or anything, but I'm here helping and I need you. We are at, and I told him it's like Olstead Acres. And so that was, so he knows exactly where that is. I don't have to give directions to anything like that. And I'm like, first responders aren't here. The ambulance is going to be a while and we are going to get hit by other cars. I need your help. Like, I need you.
Mm-hmm.
My mom tells me later, dad, hangs up the phone, grabs that. He goes to like his shop and I mean, he didn't know what he was walking into.
Right.
So like tools go like jaws of life. Are we doing this? Like he's amazing that way. And I feel maybe that's where because he just shows up and he performs.
Right.
So he comes up. Well, actually, that's ahead of myself, because I had just called him. Sorry. And so we hang up the phone. I'll be right there. So the gentlemen get Harlan up on the road, and I come and I hand my friend back his phone. I'm like, we're good here. You go back to your family. Is everybody okay? And he said the other lady, like, she can't move her legs, she this, but we're okay. I'm like, you need to stay there. Harlan was not from my community. This gentleman and his family were not from my community. And I didn't have a clue who the third one was. This is what I said I was going to do.
Yeah.
Uh, so he's laid out and my dad shows up, because like it's a mile, right? It does not take that long.
Right.
And in that time, Harlan is laid out and he's like, I can't breathe. He still can't breathe. I thought it would get better out of the car, out of the seatbelt, all that kind of thing, but he can't breathe. And then he tells me he has COPD.
Mm.
And that's what the tanks were. So
Okay.
combustible, under flame, but we were already, I didn't think that there was going to be a fire. There was no gas anywhere that I could see or smell or that kind of thing. And Harlan you can tell by him telling me he's got COPD that he's kind of
Coming
coming
back a little bit.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's what the tanks are for. He's like, yes, there's one in there that has. So my friend, I'm like, you need to get the oxygen tank. So he does. We put the mask on, turn the tank. I don't know if he's getting anything, that kind of stuff. And my dad shows up then. And he has already, I mean, he had to drive through the debris and the traffic because we were on the front end furthest away from the
Mhm.
house. And comes and he's like, where do you need me? I'm like, I need a coat or something, a blanket from your vehicle, because remember I said Harlan, his
Yeah.
pants were, and I hadn't, you still want to, well, A, the mosquitoes, B, the cold, C, you're still preserving people's dignity too.
Right.
So my dad brings back this like giant Carhartt coat and I was able to cover him like down to almost his ankles. My dad's a very big, strong man. And so his Carhartt from stem to stern like was perfect, like the unzipped long way or wide
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Anyway, uh, and then I'm like, I don't think he's getting any oxygen. I don't know how to run these tanks. Will you look at that? And it wasn't on. So he took out his vice grip or whatever, rural people use, I
Yeah.
vice grip, and turned the tank on. And I said, now, like like it's a small 2-lane road. Semis come from like northwestern Minnesota and go back down all day, all night long. And I didn't want to go that way either. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so the last I saw my dad that night is he went to make, like he set up, I don't know that I don't know what he did, honestly, but whatever he did worked because people would come by and they would go, I mean, everyone was slow. I don't know where he was. And so in that time, that's happening. Harlan is laying on the highway. He's covered up. He's coming back. We have his oxygen tank. And so now we wait. So I
Mm.
hold his hand and I'm like, tell me about you.
Yeah.
Keep him talking
Right.
because he's very tired. I know enough. I mean, I was an athlete once upon a time in my life, concussion, had like all the things I just need to keep him, tells me his name, tells me where he lives. When were you born, Harlan? Oh, 1943.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, that's a long time ago. Like, what was that like? What did you do? I was in construction. I was a handyman. I did some farming. I helped, like, okay, so what brings you to my area? I grew up here. Tell me about that. Well, I meant to go to this one place, um, because they wanted a steak. Oh. Now I know this place very well. They don't have steaks. They do have burgers, but no. So I just, some details, right? How do you like your steak, Harlan? Medium rare. I'm like, oh, I love my steak medium rare too. For those of you that don't know, and I know Faith, you do, I'm a vegetarian, so I don't actually eat steak. But once upon a time when I did, medium rare was my jam. I love
Mm.
medium rare steak. Do you eat it with steak sauce? I mean, all these inane innocuous questions just to keep him. And the more we talked, the more he came around. And every once in a while, he'd be like, I'm tired. I want to take a break. And I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of tired too. So tell me, just to keep things going. Yeah, he was coming from this community very far away, and he said not very far, but 40 miles away, and he got turned around. And so I knew that because he was going the complete opposite direction of where he needed to be to go home. Plus, this place that he said he was going to eat was not open. I was pretty sure that I was like dementia, that kind of thing, which Alzheimer's, I wasn't sure, but there was something. I'm not in that industry. I don't. So the whole thing I did was just keep talking. Tell me about your family. His wife had passed. I knew he had two children, a boy and a girl. I knew where they lived. The son was his, not like his power of attorney, so make medical, all
Yeah. Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Yep. So I just, tell me about your grandkids. What do just think you get the point. But I feel like it's important to tell because those were his stories he felt important to tell. And I don't know what he was thinking or feeling at the time, but I want to tell them because, like I said, he shared those with me. His kids are very important to him. Um, and then he started kind of repeating, I don't want to go to a home. They're going to take my house. They're going
Oh,
to take my house. I just know it. I don't want to go to a home. Like, Harlan, I I understand what you're saying, and I'm like, but that's kind of a worry for another day. Like today, this is this day. Like, what do you say? I don't want to go to a home. They're gonna take my house. I think at that time I probably said segued back to like a steak question or a what other things
yeah.
do you like to eat? I can't remember, but that time I remember like just holding his hands and stroking his hair. Like just human contact, softness. Like I said, I was talking to him in a way that I would talk to my son when I'm
Yeah.
in a very like soothing mood or soothing, not mood, but
Right. So at this moment, you're not really feeling a whole lot. You're just going through and just like trying to keep him engaged because, symptoms of head trauma, neck trauma, uh, shock, all of these things, right?
all the things. He's very clearly in his 80s. Even my math can do that. And it's dark, it's late. He's, like I said, some form of dementia, shock, as you say, like it could. Ugh. But I don't remember really thinking or feeling anything.
Yeah,
I just,
just doing.
I did, right?
Mhm.
And So dad's friend or my friend, dad's employee is still there. What can I do? And I'm like, I'll just help clean all this stuff off. Like he's trying to be helpful. He just
Yeah.
doesn't, you can't blame a person. You are what you are when you get in that. Anyway, as I'm sitting there holding his hand and stroking his hair and that kind of thing, and he's lamenting about what might happen to him.
Yeah.
Trying, and I'm like, it'll be okay. Whatever it is, it'll be okay. I'm like, the first responders will be here soon. I mean, granted, now this is minutes, right? Like I said, they don't take that long. It's probably 20 minutes till they got there,
Mm.
since I knew that they were called. Um, there was something I wanted to say here. Oh, no, not yet. Sorry. So the first responders do show up, and it's folks that, I mean, I've known since I was a kid, older
Mhm.
to younger. Some I had babysat. Like these are all people that I
Yeah.
know.
Whole community, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
basically, yeah. But there's like, I want to say like maybe five that came and they were like, what do you need? I don't think he's getting enough oxygen because he kept like saying, like, he
Yeah.
couldn't. So they grabbed their own oxygen tank and put it on him and did that kind of thing. They did not put anything on his neck. They were like, what can you tell me about what happened to me? So I gave him a very smaller spiel than what I've given you, but this is what I saw. This is da 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 da. I'm like, this gentleman's name is, this is his exact birth date. This is where he lives. This is where his son lives, who makes all his medical decisions. This is his
Yeah.
blood type. He has COPD, like any demographic information, I suppose,
Mhm.
way to put it, that I could give to help a first responder. Um, and I was just like, okay, thinking I'm going to be relieved, or that people more trained, or not even more people trained in this, um, but they just needed to wait for the first responder, or not the first responder, the ambulance, because everything I had done, they would have done. And Harlan wouldn't let go of my hand. Please,
Okay.
please don't leave me.
Yeah.
I'm
You
not
trust.
going, I'm not going anywhere. I told you I wouldn't leave you, and I'm not until you are safely in an ambulance. And so we continued just our conversation. And at one point, he was like, you are a very strong girl. I can tell. I'm just a person. I didn't feel like, you don't feel that way. And I still don't feel that way. And this
No.
isn't about me, but when you see another person or human that needs you,
Right.
you just do
Do
it.
what you have to do.
Yeah. And so we talked for 40 more minutes. And there was
Holy
a whole
cow. Okay.
million, that's how long the ambulance came. And some of it was repeated questions,
Sure.
just to keep him with us. And by this time, he was, as I want to say, is about lucid as a person could become. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Was it just you asking the questions at this point, or had the first responder, not the first
No,
responder?
they didn't even ask him anything.
Oh,
Because
they were
they
just
have all the
listening and
information
taking. Okay.
they would want. And it's not like, oh, they didn't do their job. They did do their
No, no,
job.
no.
It
I was
was,
just curious if they
yeah.
were just listening to you and him have the conversations and pulling in the information and stuff from that and all that.
The only information they needed or wanted was what I had given them about his demographics. And then
Okay.
I don't know where they went. One was
Okay.
like, but they were not involved, and no one was listening. We were just having conversation like you and I are. Like
Mhm.
Harlan and I were just talking. And then I can see after an hour, God, what a long hour, right?
Yes. Like a lifetime.
And what's funny about that, Faith, is that everything up to that point of waiting for the ambulance, like the time it took to go through all of that was like minutes, felt
Mm-hmm.
like forever. And then the time to wait for the ambulance was like I could not believe how long time could drag out, is how it felt. And
Yeah.
it's not because I wanted to go. I wanted him to have help.
Yeah. Well, because he's still
So
out there laying on the ground
laying on the
with a
highway,
toad on him, holding
yeah,
your, yeah.
yep. And so I can see the ambulance finally starting to come because I can see the lights. It's like 3, 4 miles away because it's farm country. So there's no trees. It's flat. It's all this stuff. So I can see them coming on the highway. And I'm telling them, I'm like, hey, they're on their way. They're going to be here soon, and you're going to be, you will be warm. You will see a doctor. Like everything's going to be what it will be.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I promised you I wouldn't leave you until you were in the ambulance, and that promise stays.
Mm-hmm.
And he was thankful. So the ambulance gets there, and a sheriff, which the sheriff that's close in the county that we were in, that sheriff lives in Bemidji, which was about 75 miles away. So they had to come too. Anyway, the the EMTs, when they drive an ambulance, the EMTs
Mm-hmm.
asked questions that I had given like the responses to the first responders, and it was the same ones basically. And so I repeated all that, we'll call it demographic information. And this is what and they were swift and they were smooth and they were, tell me about what happened here. And so they took like keeping them talking.
Mm-hmm.
And they did this while they got him on one of those stretcher platform things. They stabilized his neck before I mean, you have such a mad respect for people like that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and I was still holding his hand, and they were like, okay, Harlan, we're gonna go. And Harlan still has my hand and he tightens it and he says, will you come with me? Oh, I would love to. The professionals need all the time with you that they can get.
Mhm.
And this is where our paths part. I'm like, but I'm happy to have met you. And yeah. So we let go of hands and they got him into the ambulance. And the ambulance took off. And then the sheriff was there, the first responders, like I said, there was still the debris, the vehicle that's still smoking, steaming, all that stuff. And my dad's employee is still standing there, or he's still around. And I cannot thank him enough because even though in his freeze response, it was the strength that I needed, every time I turned around, he was standing there.
And
And
I
I think
think that, go
I
ahead.
need to have that because
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing. I'm
Yeah.
not a medical professional. I am not, I'm a winner's cry on the inside kind of person.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was just a lot. And it was then that like my whole body, after I'm gonna say it was like an hour and 20 minutes total from brake
Yeah.
light to Harlan is gone. My whole body just went like,
And you're exhausted.
the adrenaline, the everything that was holding me up, I felt like my limbs had become pudding. And I like looked at myself and I was covered in bodily things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what do we do now? And I said, just take me home. I'm like, where's my dad? I think my dad had been gone. Once the ambulance got there, my dad left, or the sheriff, because then they take, which
Yeah.
as they should, right?
Control over.
So we had to go the long way around because the highway was, I mean, it's one highway up and one down. It was full
Yeah.
of accident stuff. So we went the long way around and pulled up into my driveway. And I gave him a hug. Like, thanks for staying with me.
Thanks for being there. Like, I don't
And
think that, so when we have these people, like this friend of yours, this worker of your father's, um, you said he's much younger than you. I think a lot of times experience or lack of experience, and you have a child. So I know you've had traumatic incidences with your son, fallen or whatever, and you're like, oh shit, I need to do this, XYZ. You've been in sports, all these things. Um, and your father, with how he is, with just like no questions, just going right to it. What do you need? What do I need to be doing? How do I help? How do I not fix this situation, but how do I get in and help this situation? So I
without
think
the
that's
kids
a big thing.
in the way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but the young gentleman just being there and being able to say, hey, what do you need me to do? Um, I probably took him by shock, like, oh my gosh, I have no idea. Like, what is this? But as a mom, you're like, we need to get this done, or
And I will add in too that he is from South Africa. So he comes over seasonally. A bunch of them do to work on the farm.
okay.
So the way our medical system, ambulance system, all that
Sure.
stuff works is vastly different.
Yeah, so he would have been not knowing at all what to do, what to expect, how things work. So he definitely needed someone to tell him what to do or how to do it or whatever.
And so him just being there was great. And so I was just like, I'm gonna go inside. I need to clean off. I will contact you tomorrow. I'm like, I'm really sorry that I invited you out to go look at this moon. So he leaves
I
and
think
I
it was
get
a
in,
blessing that you invited
um,
him out. It was a blessing you invited him out.
right?
Otherwise, you would have not been in that situation. You wouldn't have been a half a mile or a quarter mile from Harlan,
I wouldn't have
to
been
be
there.
able to even help. And who knows what would have happened otherwise. Could have been a vastly different story.
And so I go in the house and like I said, I'm like covered in stuff. And I sat down on this like bar stool kind of at the end of the counter at my parents' house. And then that's when I cried. And I
Yeah.
didn't even know what I was crying for. It just was so much. Um, and this is kind of the part where we started in the podcast of it's different. I didn't know this person. This was not my trauma. This
Mm.
was not my thing. How am I supposed to feel? Like I don't feel right, but I don't know what I'm allowed to feel. I'm a pretty detached person, or present that way, I guess, as it is. So I'm like, I don't even know how to sit down and identify this. Plus, I'm really tired in my body. Like, so I took my clothes off, threw them in the laundry, took a shower, and I went to bed. And I slept like I slept like very hard. I can't
Yeah.
use euphemism because none of them are appropriate, but I slept so hard for like 6 hours. And then I got up in the morning and my dad was sitting at the counter and my mom was in the kitchen. And they both just asked, they're like, how are you doing?
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah,
like,
I
not
bet.
good. And I don't know why, not good. Uh, they didn't ask any questions. They know me very well. You know, they're my parents, right? Uh, when it's time for you to know, I'll tell you. I didn't, it was still I didn't even know how to process, right? And it was then that my dad tells me that the gal in the other vehicle was my godmother
Oh,
who lives this far away from my parents. And she was driving this way and Harlan was driving this way.
They were meeting oncoming.
Yep, and he started to drift.
Oh,
So the assumption is, did he fall asleep? Was he, it's dark, right? I could go on about the assumptions for a while, but so she started to move over because she saw him starting to drift and she thought he would correct and he never did. And when they hit about 6 inches of their vehicles covered each other. So had it been just a few more inches, would have been a very different story for both of them. And it spun her vehicle around and put her on the other side of the ditch.
mhm. And
And
this
that
was a vehicle that you had no idea who was involved, correct?
was in it.
Yeah.
Yep. I knew that there was a family. I knew there was Harlan, and I knew there was this other
Another
woman.
lady. Okay.
Knew that these two weren't from my hometown. She definitely was, right?
Mhm.
So then it made sense. I'm like, well, that his wheel was off his truck and was way over here. That's
Oh,
why
yeah.
his driver's side door was like
Smoke
smeared and smashed in because they met like that.
driver's side. Yeah.
And I remember thinking at that time, I'm like, well, there's a reason that I didn't know it was her. I wouldn't have managed to keep my cool. I
Right.
loved my mother very dearly.
Yeah.
Um, I would have maybe left this to check on her, or my head
Yeah.
or my heart would have been with her. Whatever it was, I can't say I'm glad that I didn't know, but there was a reason that I didn't.
Right.
Um, and so throughout that day, like this was the very next day, guys just very sober, sombering, that kind of thing. The friend like just checked in on him a couple times and we were both in the same mindset, which you don't want to sit around and I
Right.
just left
Yeah.
alone. I don't know. And then it was the next day.
Mhm.
I went online, well, always online, but I like had Googled the accident the day before to see what was said, to see like just how people were. I didn't know. And it was the second day after the accident. And I read that he passed.
Mm. Was it from injuries that he had sustained in the wreck, or was it just older age, or who you don't know? They didn't say. Okay.
I just know he was in receiving some care at he was never out of the hospital. So when the ambulance took him in, I had heard he never had left. Um, so then I had to call my friend so that he could, because, well, hey, you don't want to keep that. Like,
Right.
we were in this together, and
You have
then,
that shared trauma that you experienced together.
you don't want him to find out like 2 months later and then have to relive everything again.
Right.
Then I go to my mom. I'm still up north. And I just like hugged my mom and I started to bawl, which I think I've said winners cry on the inside, right? Like not very good at that, but she's my mom and said, Mommy died. She goes, I know. She
Mm.
had known, but she didn't tell me.
Right.
And it just, yeah, everything. And so that was my time with him, about an hour and 20 minutes. And my mom's words of solace at that time were, you were where you needed to be. And you gave him or his kids the gift of seeing each other one more time.
Yeah.
And who knows what Harlan knew or who knows what he felt or what he saw. I mean, who knows any of that in terms of like felt like is death impending, like that kind of thing. But he wasn't there alone.
Right.
You should probably also know I'm not the most affectionate. Hand holding, hair stroking. I do it to my son. That's my baby. So it's just all very out of typical character for me. So I tell you this story because it's still something that I think about. He has made an impact. I acknowledge him every now and again. I mean, I think about him, and I acknowledge him. I mean, I walk my dog very early in the morning when the stars are still out and stuff. And when he comes to my mind, or when he's whatever it is, I just hope he's in a good place. And I'm just like, you never had to go to a home. You didn't want to. And so when you and I first started talking about this, and I told you, like, because it was very fresh, it was like days after,
Yeah.
and I was very scattered. I'm scattered as an individual anyway. It's the ADHD, right? But even more so. And I remember telling you, I'm like, I feel guilty crying because these tears aren't meant for me. He wasn't my grandpa. He wasn't, I suppose if you, yeah, wasn't, I didn't know him. I didn't know his family. He was not from my community. He's dead now. What does it matter what I did or what we did, or that why did I have to be, is all, then it becomes very egocentric, like me. And I'm just like, this grief doesn't belong to me. What do I do with it? Which is a lot of where you come in, being in the space that you're in. Grief is not, there is no ownership of it. It is there for you when it needs to be, and it leaves you when you're done, when it's done.
Mhm.
And so it was a lot of internal back and forth, like cognitive dissonance. I feel very sad. You have no right to feel sad. You're taking away the emotion that belonged to his family. Like, that's what it felt like. Like, this isn't mine to feel, it's somebody else's, and I'm taking it. It was a whole bunch of stuff like that. And I think it was the first probably 3 full moons after that that everything just came back. Whenever I'd see it, it wasn't there for days, and it doesn't cripple me or anything like that, but it just, what do I do with it? I'm sad. And eventually over time, the guilt or I can't feel, like, that kind of stuff went away, but obviously I still feel some type of way about it.
Yeah.
I My
Of
eyes
course.
welling up, or the way my voice would crack and that kind of thing. But this story is important for me to share with you, or to the people that follow you. I don't know what this is called, but follow you. Grief introduces itself, or trauma introduces itself into your life in very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I had not planned for this one at all. And then suddenly I had to deal with it because I still had to work. I still had to raise a kid. I still, like, all the stuff. But I just keep going back to that time where we were holding hands, and he, grabbed my hand through the window, and please don't let me die.
Yeah.
So
A lot of
that kind,
responsibility was putting on you as well.
with the smells and just all the stuff, it was just, I feel like I will be 80 years old, and I will still be able to tell the story like it just happened this morning.
I think it's because it was burned into your memory, because it was traumatic. A lot of times when we have traumatic things that happen to us, like, we can recall everything, like the exact shade of the sky at that moment, the exact placement of the trees if they're around, the smells, the feel, the tension or non-tension or whatever's in the air. You know it, you feel it. You can,
The amount of detail that you're brain takes in and remembers, right? Like I remember what I was wearing. I remember what he was wearing. I know his vehicle. I knew the color of the gentleman's truck that I saw, which my godmother's vehicle was on the other side of his. I remember what that guy was wearing. I remember everything, and I am not known for
Yeah,
memory a lot,
exactly.
right? Like, yeah, just it
So
is
talk to me about how, like, what was your process? Like, because I know you, and then we've talked about this many times, but what was your process on when the grief would come up? What would you do?
things you're not supposed to do, right? Ignore it. That's where it first started.
Yeah,
Talk bad about it. You don't belong to me. Like, ignore it. I have house chores, I have work stuff, I have the, like all the things. That didn't go so well because it kept coming up every full moon. So I talked to you about it, or when it would just,
mhm,
and it was only a snippet, right?
yeah,
Thinking about this, we didn't relive the whole story. And just sitting with it is like an unwanted house guest. It was never going to leave until I acknowledged it, sat with it, and then finally, like, decided that it was okay to be sad.
yeah,
And you are the one that told me that the trauma does belong to me.
hmm,
It's not reserved for blood relatives or for whatever, that it belongs to the event and the experience. And I was there.
yeah,
So it was really, taking bits and bytes and information and support and that kind of thing from people and readings, that kind of stuff around me.
hmm,
And just kind of like is almost like defeated, right? Like you just sit down and you're like, okay, fine, let's just do this. Otherwise, you're never going to leave me alone.
right.
Yeah. And so just letting it be. And it would sit there with me, whether it was the grief or the sadness. Maybe it's both. I don't know. The tense, like when I tell it, I can still like feel it. The body doesn't forget, right?
Oh, it
Um,
does.
and then it would go, and then it come, and over time, it just kind of will go. I think about often writing his son a card,
Hmm.
and I wouldn't sign my name or even my return address, anything like that, because it's not about me. And you don't know what people are like, right? But
Right.
I just would want to say that I was there with his dad seconds after the accident, and I never left him till he was in the ambulance. And just to be able to say, like, I held his hand, stroked his hair, made sure he was covered, like your dad was not alone.
Yeah.
And I haven't done it, and I don't, it's just something that doesn't feel right. I don't know who these people are, so maybe they don't want, there's too many unknowns, and I haven't
That's
released that.
the way-
Huh?
Maybe that's the way to get the closure, is to write the
Yeah,
letter.
maybe.
I know every year when my granddaughter passed in 2021, it was October 9th. And it was an accident, and there was a nurse that was on the road with her. And every year on October 9th, she shows up to our house and she delivers a card for my son and daughter-in-law. And I think it's the most beautiful thing ever, because it lets them know she's not forgotten. It lets them know that she's very much loved. It lets them know that they remember that this lady remembers. And most people forget, or they get caught up in their daily lives, and they don't take the time because, they're scared, they don't know what to say, they're not going to want to hear from me, those things, when the reality is they would probably very much love to hear from you. Because there's more things that you could talk about than just being there with him in his last, before he went on the ambulance and stuff like that. Tell him how much he loved his family and how much he talked about his grandkids and his kids. And you probably know more about his kids and grandkids than they do about themselves.
Yeah.
But it's one of those sharing the stories to keep the memory of their father alive. Um, and maybe the tears, going back before you said the tears, you don't know why they come. Maybe the tears aren't yours. Maybe the tears are for the family. And they're coming out through you because the grandkids aren't going to get to know him no
I,
further than what they've already gotten.
that's true. I feel like if it were my grandpa or my dad, it would bring up sadness all over again, but also relief that they weren't alone. And so I've thought about it. For me, things have to
Yep.
feel right to do it. And so when it feels right, I will do that. I don't know. So it was, I mean, he changed my life in a very short amount of time. Um, and
And
I
you
would,
changed his. And be honest, I mean, it's very clear you changed his as well. Because otherwise he might have been there all by himself, still in the vehicle waiting on the ambulance to get there.
that is my trauma adjacent story. It was one of those life events for me that you're never the same from after. And I think it took me longer maybe than it needed to work through because I didn't accept it as my own when it is. It's something I needed to go through. And why I did, I don't know, but that's not for me to know. I did.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's because you're an angel. You stopped by, you helped him.
So
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing this. Because a lot of times we go through life, we deal with all kinds of things, all kinds of traumatic situations that we're in, and we don't honor the grief that comes from the situation that's happened. And it's not necessarily just when people die. Like it's when we lose a job, when we see someone be abused, or when there's a car wreck and you're just trying to help. Like these emotional moments that come into play, grief will be there, you know, to the extent with which you let it, but it's going to come no matter whether you want it to or not.
that's exactly right. It does come. And yeah, there are things where if it's like, when my grandpa passed, like that's my grandpa. Of course I'm allowed to be sad.
Mhm.
And it could, for anyone that, girl, like doctors, nurses, first responders,
Yeah,
officers, like anyone, I don't know how you do that you never know what you're going to come upon and the things you
right.
see on a day-to-day basis. I, man, I already had respect for folks in that area of life, and it catapulted because I'm like, how do people do this and then come
Daily.
back and do it again the next day? I was like, F that. Yeah,
You're like, this once is enough for me. No more,
that's
thank you.
exactly right. And I did, uh, yeah, you'd be so good at it. Look at how calm you were. I was like, my insides right now can't handle it.
Yeah. I remember working at a nursing home obviously years and years and years and years and years ago. Well, maybe not obviously, but years ago. I was about 17 and I loved my job because I love connecting with people. I can connect with people all day long. Love it. And these people had stories because they're older. It's a nursing home, and they had stories, and I love talking to them and hearing their stories until they started passing. And I realized I couldn't do this anymore because I bonded with them so hard that when they passed, it was to me like a family member had just gone, a grandmother, a grandfather, an aunt and uncle, like, and I broke. I'm like, no, I can't do this. And I got out of the nursing industry and I never went back because
I
I
had a
couldn't.
similar profession change like that. I was worked as like a probation officer,
Mhm,
in the first start of my career, my life. And I worked with kids. And
mhm,
the first time I had to put handcuffs on a kid because he violated his probation. He's a kid. He's
mhm.
much larger than I am. So that, I mean, it wasn't about that, but he was 16 years old. And I was like, this makes me feel sick. Like
Yeah,
I gross. Like I can't do this. This will not be what I make a life out of. I cannot do this to a kid.
yeah.
What he did is obsolete, right? Or why we were there, that kind of thing. But he was a kid. So same kind of thing. Like,
Can't do it. I just can't do it.
can't
Can't
do it. Yeah.
can't bond with them to lose them. And in my mind, it was like, nope, we're gonna go as far from this place as possible. And then look at me now. I work in the frickin' trauma and grief field.
Very true.
So,
Funny
uh,
how the world comes full circle.
right?
You figure out it pulls you back in, but
Right?
in a very different way.
It does. Very different. Very different. So, thank you so much, Kat, for being on the podcast. If you had one piece of advice to leave with someone who might be in the same situation as you or similar, what would it be?
During the situation or post situation?
Anything.
I'm going to say it and then I feel like I need to just explain. I
Mm.
would just say, let go. And what I mean by that is something will take over. Whether it's, it's not your situation to control, it's not your thing to worry about when you're in that moment. Something takes over your ability to lift a man who's got 40 pounds on you out of a car. Something takes over with your heart that you can hold the hand of a stranger when you don't hold the hands of the people you love. Definitely work through the things that you're feeling after and let that go. Trying to control what that is too. Just let it go and let it be. And it will all will be well, whatever that means. My mom says, and then I'll close with this because I think it's actually pretty fitting. She has said to me before, it will all be well in the end. And it will all be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, then it's not the end.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. Absolutely love that. Thank you so much, Kat, for being on here.
Thank you for
And
having me.
if you know of anyone that is been in this situation or has dealt with this, and you think that these words of encouragement or the traumas and the emotions that she has used to get through it and may provide strength for someone else, please share this video with them. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Faith.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of Release. All the links plus a few extras are posted in the show notes below. And if you think someone you know could benefit by listening to this episode, please share it with them. And as always, keep going, keep being, keep doing. You are amazing.